Why do languages exist, and what purpose does a language serve? Oftentimes, when we discuss Dravidian languages, there is an overwhelming tendency to want to label certain languages as mother languages, attempting to assert superiority by way of antiquity. This isn't exactly a reasonable conversation to have for two reasons. Languages evolve over time. An older version of language can be completely unintelligible to a modern speaker, where it's pretty much a whole different language. Two, languages are inextricably tied to human identity, making it hard to date when exactly a language is born. For example, people in this region have self-identified as Tamil for millennia, but people in this region more than likely spoke a slightly different language that was probably identified as Tamil as well, due to their rulers speaking Tamil officially. What exactly are we dating here? How old a language is, or how long a group of people have identified with that language? While it's tough to say when languages were born, a more productive conversation revolves around why exactly do languages exist in specific contexts, what factors led to languages diverging in creating distinct identities, and what can we learn about the sociopolitics of a group of people by what changes the language goes through. Vanakkam, my name is Manipravalam and I make videos on Dravidian culture, history and linguistics, and today we are going to be taking a deep dive into the dynamics of Malayalam and Sanskrit in medieval Kerala. First, let's take a listen to this song. This is a kriti composed by Maharaja Swati Tirunal of the Travancore dynasty, and it's written in a language called Manipravalam. Here, the name gives us the definition for what the language serves the purpose of. The Mani or gem is classical Sanskrit, and the Pravadam or choral is usually a Dravidian language, typically Malayalam, but sometimes in certain cases Tamil and Telugu. This hybrid or macronic language is most famous for being used in poetic and musical contexts, with the height of its popularity being in the 12th century in the Travancore court. One of the reasons why Manipravalam was preferred over Malayalam or Tamil in musical contexts was probably because South Dravidian languages are quite consonant heavy, making it hard to sing melodic phrases. For example, it's harder for us to sing rather than but this idea of Manipravalam, besides being a literary instrument, reveals something deeper. So we know that Malayalam was once considered a western coastal dialect of Middle Tamil that likely formed a distinct identity between the 9th and 13th century. One of the main reasons as to why Tamil and Malayalam are simply not dialects of the same language is due to Malayalam's concentrated use of Sanskrit compared to its sister language, Tamil. But how exactly did Malayalam end up integrating more Sanskrit elements to the language than Tamil, despite their geographical proximity and cultural similarity? And how exactly did the Sanskritization of the language lead to their distinct identities? The story of Sanskrit in Kerala begins quite early in history with legends of 8 families or grihams of Brahmins migrating to the Malabar country during the Kalabra period, who later became the Nambudri Brahmins. These Purvashika or front-bun Brahmins have inhabited the south of India since at least the Sangam age. I mention this because what I will be detailing in this video are not foreign ideas that come from the north of India, but were in fact perpetuated by South Indians who have inhabited these lands for thousands of years. Let's take a look at what the social context of Kerala was in the 12th century. This period between the 12th and 16th century is marked by political fragmentation. Chera dynasty had declined, which led to the rise of local chieftains such as the Venad, Kozhikode and Koluthanadu dynasties, which tells us that the overall culture of Kerala was not shaped by the discourse of a princely class, but another class of people with immense political power. During this period, Kerala society was heavily stratified on caste lines, specifically excluding Bahujan, Dalit, and Adivasis. It was also seeing a lot of foreign trade and economic development, with temples such as the Thiruvananthapuram Padmanabhaswamy temple being centers of culture and economy. Since the Nambudiri Brahmins controlled the temple, they also controlled culture and hence public discourse. This is evident in the 14th century text, the Leela Tilakam, which is a treatise on grammar and poetics of the Manipravalam language. However, the very peculiar way in which it was written gives us an idea of how it formed the sociopolitics of modern Kerala. First, The one standout theme in this treatise is the idea of a pure language and a dirty language. The Leela Tilakam engages in what Chomsky et al. Calls as prescriptivism, or the establishment of a correct form of a language. We can see this when the Leela Tilakam refers to the old local Malayalam language spoken by lower caste individuals as a Neecha Bhasha, or an inferior language, by poising Manipravalam as a superior language that can only be spoken by the Traivarnika, or the three upper Varnas. In fact, the Leela Tilakam, despite being about the Manipravalam language, is written in Sanskrit, which really goes to show how badly the authors of the text wanted to suppress the Dravidianness of Malayalam. According to M.A.K. Halliday, language is a social semiotic, which is a tool that shapes reality. Here, Manipravalam is a non-spoken meta-language and is the tool that would shape Malayalam and therefore Malayali society. By marking the original Malayalam as inferior and the Sanskritized Manipravalam as superior, the Leela Tilakam seems to be written for the purpose of validating, legitimizing, and standardizing the caste hierarchy. Another glaring theme in the Leela Tilakam and other texts in Manipravalam is just how depraved they are. The title itself, Leela Tilakam, or the pinnacle of play, is a purposeful sexual innuendo that gives us a teaser into what the rest of the text is about. I'm not a prude by any means, but the sexuality discussed in Manipravalam texts is one that centers the male gaze and views female bodies as sexual objects. For example, in another Manipravalam text, the Chandrodhamam, a story about a Devadasi sex worker, here are a list of things that were sexualized to legitimize the objectification of this character. Pregnancy and female infancy. The mother's body during pregnancy and the infant's gesture are immediately sexualized and interpreted through the male gaze. The child's innocent actions, such as biting or rolling over, are read as rehearsals of future sexual acts. Childhood. The girl child simply being physically close with her mother is portrayed as latent homoeroticism. Yes, a child and her mother being portrayed as homoerotic. This text attempts to assert that the sole purpose and pursuit of a woman is to be a sexual object of a man, and she does so with complete surrender and willing. The language used towards women in these Manipravalam texts is also very telling. Take a listen to this line from the Chandrodsavam. Amara nagari yennundunne manattu mugde peye sukrata majam gamya bhumir manonya viruta surata madyan manini netra lakshmi Kuvalayita Mani Prasada Malabhirama. Here, the word mugde, which is used to refer to women, is of Sanskrit origin and comes from the root word mu, which pretty much just means useless or worthless. Another word for women in Manipravalam is malavar, which is a word of Dravidian origin, which just translates to basically hollow or empty or just straight up a hole. These words linguistically construct female subjectivity as a void or lack. This aligns with Jacques Lacan's idea that to enter a language is to enter a realm of desire and absence. Here, a woman is discursively portrayed as an empty being who can only seek fulfillment through being amenable to the male gaze. The story of Manipravalam is a case study in how language can be used as a tool in building a specific social and political identity. Manipravalam therefore successfully asserted two levels of hierarchy. One, the rigid caste hierarchical society that disenfranchises lower castes by labeling their language as inferior, and two, a patriarchal hierarchy that puts men in the position of the beholder and women as subordinate objects of voyeurism. This dark legacy is written into the very identity of model Kerala, the state's notorious historical atrocities against oppressed castes, and Savarna society's obsession with enforced female nudity is not separate from its linguistic history. Therefore, the divergence of Malayalam from Tamil is more than a story of grammatical changes. It is a story of a sociopolitical schism. So when we ask what the purpose of a language serves, the answer is actually quite clear. It can either be a mirror to the soul of a people, but it can also be a weapon in the hands of an oppressive class in carving out an identity that serves their own ends. So what are your thoughts on caste and patriarchy in Kerala? Make sure to like, subscribe, and share your opinions with the class in the comments below. And as always, Nanni, Namaskaram.